Hello and welcome to Sanguinius 40k, your competitive Blood Angels tactics and tips channel on how to get the most out of your Sons of Sanguinius on the tabletop. In today's video, we'll be going over the 3 keys to choosing the best secondaries in Warhammer 40k. Although these are general tips for anyone with any faction, I'll be sure to chime in from my personal perspective on how I go about this with Blood Angels. Without further ado, let's take a look. Before we begin, I do advise you to reflect as we go along as almost a training exercise, asking yourself whether or not you are currently implementing these steps, or if you are, how you can improve on addressing them to reach your fullest potential. Theory crafting can only get you so far, but my goal is sharing this to help you feel better from start to finish, before, during, and after your games of Warhammer 40k. The first step of the process begins in the list building phase. The 2 main takeaways from this are units that have specific roles within your army, otherwise known as action monkeys, and another concept called scoring redundancy. Let me explain. So it's up to us to discover, before we even hit the table, what units are going to actually score us points. I'll of course expand in a little bit based on my army and my decisions, but we really need to establish what's dealing our damage, and that could be in terms of range or in close combat or even with psychic, and what is actually going to help us in multiple areas of the game. So what I mean by that is, with scoring redundancy, is a unit that can actually do multiple roles for a specific secondary. So a good example of that is something such as an incursor. So an incursor can retrieve data for you, an incursor can also raise a banner, and an incursor can also investigate signals. So not only can they perform any of those roles and do it quite well, being a troop choice, but there's also other units that, in case those incursors don't make it to turn 2, you'll have another ability to do so, such as another unit of incursors, or a squad of 6 assault marines. That's called building redundancy into your list in terms of having abilities to affect the scoreboard in a positive way for yourself. So let's take a look at my list as an example and how I created my secondary plan while constructing it. So at the heart of this list is my original core of my 3 go-to troops, my favorite jump pack units such as Sanguinary Guard and Death Company, and of course I can't go without my 2 favorite characters in my Chapter Master and my Sanguinary Priest. So with all that being said, I'm not quite sure off the top of my head what the number is, but that gave me a solid amount of points already built into the list that I knew I wanted to keep no matter which direction I went. So from there, we of course have to adapt to the meta and be open to changing our list in terms of what works and what might actually help us in the long run. So units such as the Eradicators came in, units such as the Bikes, as well as the Aggressors had to come in. So where is my scoring coming from? Well, all those units mentioned previously are going to help me contribute to the scoreboard in just naturally how I'm playing my game, in terms of moving up the board, in terms of holding objectives. Those units will get the job done. But then it's the actual added a few units that do make a big difference, such as the Landspeeder Storm, which I have had for a while, but that definitely is something I personally couldn't leave home without. It's just very tough to find something that does the same role for 55 points. And definitely helped by adding 2 units such as the Voidsmen at Arms and as well as the 6 Assault Marines. So both of them were squad sizes of 6. Reason being, I'm sure maybe most of you already know why, but for those of you who don't, that's because when I'm doing or performing an action such as retrieve Noctmoon data, they're able to automatically complete the secondary without it failing. And trust me, I've had my fair share of 6s rolled while trying to complete that action with Sanguinary Guard. So I've learned the hard way. I've tried to build that redundancy into the list to make sure it's completed. So the way I approach things with this list is I stick to my core. I stick to that same playstyle that I truly love and just enjoy bringing to the tabletop. And now I have a confident way of scoring a few secondaries that maybe aren't exactly, always a given. And at least this gives me an ability to still play into the meta and adapt as I need to on the fly due to the flexibility of the list. But that's where the list building phase is so important in Warhammer, because you have to always establish your core, establish what works best for you, and how you want to see your army approach the tabletop. The next step is to select secondaries that suit your army and playstyle. Are you aggressive or defensive? And especially, what does your army do best? Understand its key strengths and weaknesses. So I know there is obviously a possible argument that this should actually be coming before the list building step. However, I actually think it's quite crucial to mess around with list building, see what units you, of course, currently own and what you currently enjoy putting on the tabletop, and that actually might help you shape into the player that you want to be naturally. So what I mean by that is for example, on my end of the spectrum, I truly do love Sanguinary Guard and Death Company. Now, I know sometimes they're not the most optimal choices, but I could never envision myself stepping up to a table without those units. So with those units on the board, they are hypermobile, they're quite efficient at what they do, and they actually have some form of an aggressive but reactive playstyle naturally to the way they're built. So that's actually helped shape me as a player, and I've personally and have enjoyed adapting my playstyle to what my favorite units like to do. Now, of course, this doesn't always work out, and I know this is not always the case. For example, your favorite unit might be Blade Guard Veterans, and you might say, well, Sam, my Blade Guard vets are my favorite, but, they're just a little too slow for my liking, and yeah, I know that they can kind of do a similar role to Sanguinary Guard, but I just prefer my Blade Guard Veteran models, and that's kind of what I want to see. Now, there is no easy, simple answer to say, well, too bad, or oh, whatever, you can adjust and just run Sanguinary Guard. But just know that there's certain expectations that you need to have then with those favorite units that you own and that you currently love and enjoy playing with. And that will actually help you in the long run in terms of really sitting down and, again, in this scenario, stating to yourself, okay, I truly love my Blade Guard Veterans. They can do XYZ extremely well. How can I use that to the best of my capabilities? And right there, we've established what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and that allows you to approach the game with a better mindset and a better game plan in terms of what secondaries are now more achievable for you and how the rest of the army wants to be built around that core that you enjoy. The last step is which secondaries makes the most sense for the mission. So the two key points about this step is the fact that you're going to have to identify how many objectives are on the table, and of course, more importantly, where they're located, whether or not they're central, or whether or not they're going to be more on the outskirts, so to speak. And the second part being playing specifically into that mission according to the list and the Army's design. So one of the actual key factors that we need to take into account with the current mission pack available to us for match play, which is the GT Nakmund mission pack, is the fact that 6 out of the 9 missions all have a centrally located objective. So that actually plays decently well into a Space Marine's favor. Not entirely because of maybe where we sit in the meta, and I obviously understand it's not been the easiest road for many of us and players alike, especially myself being Blood Angels. I very much understand the struggles. However, we have a really decent game plan going into those 6 different missions. The ones that I tend to actually find sometimes a more difficult approach on are the ones with 6 objectives rather than 5. The reason being is because we're already quite an elite army and a bit, I know this is obviously my opinion, quite overcosted, but when there are less objectives on the board, it actually allows us to put our resources in less places on the board and actually build some bit of scoring redundancy in multiple locations and actually, fight for different areas of the board on better fronts, if that makes sense. Now, the thing we have to always take into account is, of course, the terrain layout and whether or not it's heavy, light, or medium, obviously, and whether or not we're going to have, an aggressive army across the board from us or maybe a more conservative one. That all comes with just a lot of decision making on the fly and understanding different armies in the game. That kind of is going to be a topic for a later date, as we can't really dive too deep into that now. So let's just focus on the controllables that we can do and make sure that at the end of the day, we have a good game plan regardless of who we're going up against. Now, I know that obviously will change, but we'll just keep it simple for today's session. So just before we wrap up, let's take a look at a mission from the Nakmund GT mission pack as an example to work off of. So let's take a look at mission 22 conversion from the GT mission pack. So back to my army and how I would approach this game. As you can tell by the way I built my list, it's pretty quite simple to choose retrieve Nakmund data based on the units that I've selected. And then it kind of comes down to what does my army want to do and how do I want to approach the board. So to keep things simple, I would be fighting for the middle, so that kind of tells me Stranglehold is a pretty good option. And because I'm going to be there anyway, Oaths of Moment actually could help me. So I know Oaths can be a bit swingy whether you go first or second. However, depending on the terrain and depending on how your opponent plays into you, it's still quite achievable to even get an 8 to 10 on the low end. And of course, that kind of determines how you're going to be moving around the board regardless. Also, a common question that I am asked quite often is, Sam, what if you're going up against, like a very powerful board control army? Let's just use Custodes as an example. Well, then you're right. It does get a bit trickier, and Stranglehold, Oaths of Moment, and Retrieve definitely might not be on the table. So let's use Custodes as an example in this exercise. So now that I know that they have a lot of durability and they have actually quite mobile units such as the Veritas Praetors, which is the bikes, all of a sudden those are off the table in terms of trying to fight for the middle, just in case they overload and then I have to overcommit, and we definitely don't want to put ourselves in any situation to do so. So a simple adjustment for my list going into this mission now, going into Custodes as the example, would be going Relentless Assault, going for possibly a Psychic Secondary, which could be Mental Interrogation because of my Librarian, which has helped me unlock that ability, or the opportunity to take something like that, or even Psychic Ritual, depending on how my opponent approaches the board. But obviously, let's just stay to the side of caution and go with Mental Interrogation. And then Retrieve Nachman Data actually isn't a bad choice. So just like that, by building that scoring redundancy across your list and building flexibility into it, it shows you that you can actually take multiple different directions going into each game, and it gives you that flexibility to not just stick to one specific path in order to have a win condition. So hopefully this helps you guys. All right, and that's it for today's how-to video. Hopefully that helps you guys out in the future with your future games of Warhammer, both competitively and otherwise. Please like, share, and subscribe to help raise awareness of the channel, to help it grow. All your support is greatly appreciated. Just let me know in the comments, or let me know otherwise if there's any ways that I can improve to just make my content better for you. And hope you guys enjoyed. See you in the next one.